All right, and I will now hand it over to Panyan, one of the co-presidents, to begin moderating our discussion.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So Inmar, for those of us who don't know you that well, do you mind just giving a description of what you do and what an average day in your life looks like?
Sure. So I'm a director of engineering at Uber ATG. That's the Advanced Technologies Group. That's the self-driving division for Uber. About 3.5 years ago, Uber opened an office in Toronto that is led by Raquel Urtasun, who is also a professor at the University of Toronto and one of the co-founders of the Vector AI Institute, for those of you familiar with it. So the idea was that this will be a research lab or a research and development lab specifically for deep learning, so an area within AI for self-driving. And so because Raquel has this experience and this was her specialization as an academic, it was a very good fit. This is basically the scientific problem that she's interested in. She has a lot of experience. And so she brought a bunch of researchers, so people doing their masters and PhDs, to study the problem as a scientific problem, but also with a very big focus on how do we take it from an open-ended science problem to something where we have a technology that we can deliver and we can run on cars. Because the idea was that we don't know how to solve self-driving. It's not just an engineering problem where we need to write some code and build some hardware. We actually need to develop the next generation of knowledge and of technology so that we can do that safely at scale and so on. So Raquel, whom I knew from when I was doing my PhD, she invited me to basically come join her and build under her guidance a team of people who are good at understanding science, but also engineering, and can take these technologies that are developed by researchers and bring them onto the actual car. So we call my team the research engineering team. And the people on it have a combination of skills. So they are well versed in deep learning, either because they've studied it or because they've picked it up on the job. And they also know software engineering. So they understand how to build large systems properly, how to test, how to make, how to write robust software. And they are basically like the connecting tissue between how do you take this awesome research idea that is very much a prototype and a proof of concept and get it all the way to something that's actually running on a car. And so I came about 3 years ago and basically started building up the team and hired people. And today there's about 17 of us on my team. And so that's what we do. A day in my life can be quite, back when I started my career after finishing my PhD, where I was a research scientist, my days were kind of made up of a lot of, implementing different algorithms and testing them, reading scientific papers and figuring out how I can use that to help. But it was pretty kind of consistent, whereas now every day is something very, very different. So I do most of my time is spent in different types of meetings, but the meetings can be all over. So it can be, I meet with everyone on my team that reports directly to me for a one-on-one once a week. So that's about 30 minutes where we talk about what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, what kind of help I can provide them with, what kind of career aspirations and goals do they have, and how do we fit it in with the bigger vision for the team. I meet with leaders from other parts of the organization so that we can coordinate how do we want to solve certain technical problems, who is going to do it, what is the strategy for doing it, what are the timelines, and make sure that everything is kind of coordinated and choreographed so that we can deliver something that requires participation from a lot of people on time. By the way, most of the organization is based out of Pittsburgh and San Francisco. So we were already doing a lot of Zoom, but definitely not to the extent that we're doing now. And I used to travel a lot. I used to be in Pittsburgh at least once a month and in San Francisco every 6 to 8 weeks. And of course, none of that is happening anymore, but maybe one day it will resume. I meet with people from outside the company. So we have all sorts of collaborations with people from Facebook, for example, who are working on what's called PyTorch. So PyTorch is a software package for writing machine learning that's developed by Facebook, and we are close collaborators with them because we use it very heavily. So we have an NDA, so what does it stand for? A non-disclosure agreement, where we can meet and talk about, this is what we're trying to do, we need this feature, we need this, like, here's a bug, and so on. We work with them. We work with, I work with the Uber Canada leadership team. So Uber Canada, just as the core businesses of Uber Rides and Uber Eats, have a bunch of more senior folks who get together about once a month to talk and discuss various aspects that have to do with the whole organization. Sometimes I meet with government representatives. Sometimes I go and talk at different conferences and different events. So this is, I think, my third or fourth type of panel or presentation this week. Especially for things around AI, and also women in STEM is kind of a passion of mine. So I try to spend a lot of time doing that. I meet with with Raquel, with my boss, and we kind of figure out strategies and plans for doing certain things. And there are various meetings that involve quite a lot of people from the organization, where it's mostly like presenting progress or hearing what other teams are doing so that we know where things are. So a lot of my day is basically various ways of talking to different people from different backgrounds. And then every once in a while I have like a little bit of time and I quickly do emails and I do Slack and I answer questions and I ask questions and I basically squeeze it in between meetings for the most part.
That's all like really interesting, and I feel like you already answered my next question, which is what led you to pick a career in engineering. But I can already tell because your days sound more interesting than any other person I've heard of, meeting with government officials and people that work in various companies. But that's basically my next question. What were your influences when you were younger or in high school or in university in terms of what you wanted to do in the future?
So actually when I was, I think I was, I think like a lot of people, I was a nerd, and I liked knowledge, I liked reading, I liked learning, and I actually liked a lot of subjects in school, other than PE, like physical education. That was not my thing. And just to say that people can change, I actually, now I'm a bit of a fitness, freak. Like I exercise regularly because I finally figured out like 20 years into my life that it's important. But just to say that like, it's not necessarily like where you start can be different from where you end. So I liked school and I gravitated towards the math and sciences. I think I've talked to a lot of women in STEM, and that's true for many of them. So my father is an engineer, and he was someone that I admired, and I kind of wanted to do something that he will approve of. And that's funny sometimes. That's why we choose where we go, and that's definitely a story that I've heard a lot. But when I was in high school, I studied, I did this like extracurricular activity, which was it was like a neuroscience course for high school kids. And I thought it was like amazing. I thought it was super fascinating. And at that point I was like, I want to be a neuroscientist when I grow up. And then I went to, I'm originally from Israel, so we have mandatory army service. So I went to the army before, like you do it before you go to university. And actually in high school, I studied physics, and I studied like advanced physics and chemistry and math and programming. And I was terrible at programming. It was just not my topic. Like I couldn't get it. Like everything else was fine, but I was like, I don't understand this thing. And especially not actually working with the computer. Like I got the logic of how do you write code on paper, but not how do you make something actually work, getting like, for any of you who wrote some code, like the compiler complains and it gives you this message and you have no idea what's going on. So that part I really was not good at. So it almost felt like it's something that I just couldn't get right. And so when I was in the army, I was working as an intelligence analyst. So just trying to, anyways, like I can't say much about it, but I was working a lot with people who were writing software for us so that we have tools to work with. And they knew how to write software. They didn't understand what we were doing in terms of like, what are we using this for? And so I spent a lot of time explaining it to them. And I didn't have the name for it back then, but I think today it will be kind of like a product manager type of thing where you're like helping define requirements and so on. And when I was about to finish my mandatory service, they asked me if I was interested in basically staying for a couple more years and transferring into working as a software developer in the team. And they said, like, we'll teach you how to do the software development, but you bring all the knowledge of the users, which you really don't understand, and it's really useful. And I thought, okay, this is my opportunity to kind of resolve this thing that I had around software development, where I was feeling, so crappy about the fact that I couldn't figure it out. And so then that's what I did. I stayed, and that time around I did figure it out. So again, like the lesson here is, it's like sometimes the first time you come across something, you don't really understand it, but if you kind of persevere and persist, often you will be able to ramp up and get better at it. And so after I did that, I was back to, okay, but I want to be a neuroscientist. So I went to university and I thought, what should I learn so that I can do an advanced degree in neuroscience? Because back then you couldn't do an undergraduate degree in neuroscience. And I thought, okay, I'll take computer science because I'm already comfortable with the programming, and I want to know more about the theory of computer science and the stuff that I didn't know when I was learning it in the army. And I'll also study biology, because biology is actually the one subject that I didn't study at all in high school. So I felt like, if you want to study the brain, you better know something about biology. And so that was my undergraduate degree. And every time I could take an elective, I chose a neuroscience course, and I went to talk to the professors in the labs to ask them, okay, but what is research? Like, what does it actually mean to do research? Like, you're researchers, but I don't understand what it means. I really had no clue. And they kind of showed me what is it that they do. And they sent me to talk to their students, like their masters and PhD students. And different students were studying neuroscience in different ways. Like some people do, they take like a human and they run experiments and they measure how fast we react to something. Some people all the way to like looking inside a single cell and measuring something with an electrode, or even molecules, right? And kind of seeing what kind of molecules and what kind of chemicals are happening, when we learn or whatever. And every time I had these conversations, I thought, okay, this is cool, but I don't think I want to do that. And then while I was trying to figure out what is it that I want to do if I'm going to study neuroscience and be a researcher in neuroscience, I took a course in machine learning, which was a mandatory course. It wasn't even my choice, and I had no idea what it was. I basically, it was third year. I walked into the classroom and we sat down and they started teaching us, and I was like, whoa, this is cool. Because it was a combination of computer, like software programming, which I was familiar with, but also a lot of the math that I was taking and was neat, but didn't seem useful for anything. So things from calculus, things from linear algebra, from probability and statistics, all of it was needed in order to understand, what machine learning is about in depth. And also it seemed pretty useful. And at some point I had this moment where I was like, okay, so maybe I'm not going to be a neuroscientist. I won't understand the brain, but maybe I can build things that are kind of brain-like. And that's when I decided to pursue a PhD in machine learning. And then that's when I moved to Toronto, because for many reasons, but also because it has a really good department for AI and machine learning. And that's a very, very long answer to the question of what drew you to.
Because I think it's actually really inspiring to know that people that have made it in life compared to students, like they've actually switched between different topics, because that's, I think, something that people struggle with, especially when they're in undergrad. They don't really know what they want to do, and they feel like that they shouldn't switch to a completely different field. But that's actually really inspiring. Thank you for taking us through the whole thing. My next question is, you already kind of mentioned this, but by just searching up your name, I can see that like you're very involved in paneling and networking events. How did you develop this skill to be really confident and speak really engagingly in front of the public or in front of groups?
So I think just like most people, I wasn't particularly comfortable with public speaking. I mean, you have to give presentation as a student. And I remember I like my strategy was to practice really, really hard. Like I would build a slide deck, and then I would practice it and practice it and practice it, because I know that I can meander if I don't know what exactly what I'm going to talk about. And then I like someone showed me this weird trick, which I thought was weird, but it's actually really useful, where they would write out everything that they were going to say, and then they would practice by reading it, and then eventually they'll kind of remember most of it and not have to rely on the notes. And it felt a bit awkward, but I realized, like, if you really have a long presentation and you want to make sure that you're hitting all your points, this is an important tool. But it was all, honestly, it was a bit, it was still not particularly comfortable. It was not something that I would like necessarily want to do. And it was stressful, and kind of anxiety inducing. And then, but you had to do it. Like as a PhD student, you have to constantly like do presentations and talk about your work and present it at conferences. So you don't have a lot of choice. So of course, practice as always is an important part of it. But then I remember pretty clearly, there was like the day of my thesis defense, I was walking down St. George Street to go to the building where I would be presenting my thesis to my thesis committee, and it had some pretty scary people on it. And I was kind of afraid of the scary question that they're gonna ask. And, of course, like, is this good enough? And is the presentation good enough? And all of these self-doubting things. And I was starting to panic a little bit. And then I thought to myself, you know what? You're here to have fun. Like, forget everyone else, forget what they think about you. This is all about like enjoying life. I mean, I wanted to study, I wanted to know more. I spent like 5 or 6 years figuring out some stuff, and now I'm just gonna talk about it, right? And I'm gonna have fun talking about it. And I think that was like a pretty important change of, my mindset changed, and I started seeing every engagement with people as an opportunity to have fun. Like if I'm presenting, I want to have fun presenting. If I'm, talking to them, like if I'm networking, it's like, it's a human being. They have a story. I want to hear the story. I want to know, what they find interesting and maybe learn something out of it. So, so then it became kind of like a pretty fun activity afterwards. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, no.
I just said that sounds amazing, and I think like I'm also like that. I just try to get out there and try to talk to people, but I feel like you can be really shy, and that can kind of hold you back.
Yeah.
You're right. You just have to be confident and just kind of say whatever and go ahead with it. So my next question is, working at Uber, do you notice the lack of women in like the tech industry? And what do you think are some suggestions, and what can we do in order to encourage younger women to get involved?
Yeah, so when I started my PhD, I noticed that there are not a lot of women around me. And I started getting involved in kind of groups like this, where it was for women in STEM, women in computer science, women in whatever. And I started realizing there is a big problem, right? Before that, I think I was a bit oblivious, but I realized that there is an issue, and I was doing I was curious, like, why are there so few women? And I tried, doing some of the research into it. And, 15 years later, I'm hearing the same thing. So it's quite disappointing that not a lot has changed, right? Like it's the same number that are getting quoted. They're just like up to date about, okay, we don't have a lot of women in all of these different fields, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. And it's actually like, I just, like yesterday I heard someone give this presentation again with all the numbers. I'm like, wow, like we are not moving. Why are we not moving? And I don't really know what are the core reasons why there are not enough women in STEM. I think there are many reasons that people point out to. And so the way I try to think about it is, like, in my mind, everyone can do something about it. And it kind of depends on where you are. So you know, obviously as you move up in your career and you have more influence, you can do more within your organization. But I think even the way that we talk to young girls and young boys makes a difference, right? Like, you know, you might have younger siblings, or, you know, friends. At some point your friends will have children, or you will have children, and when we make choices about how we talk to, you know, girls and boys that are different, and that already sets in the expectations. And so one of the tricks I always suggest to people is, like, before you say something to a young child, think for a moment, like flip the gender, and like, would you also be saying that same thing, right? So, you know, you look so beautiful today. Are you going to say it to a boy? And if not, that tells you that this, you know, the statement is biased, you know, for a particular gender, and it cements what it is supposed to, like, what are you supposed to be if you're a woman or a man. So that's something I think everyone can do. And then as you, like for people who are, you know, for example, if you're in school, there are communities like this one where you can come together, and that helps to both build your support system so that you can persevere through the more difficult and challenging parts. And it also typically is a good place for people to brainstorm about, okay, what do we want to do? So you're now in university. You can go and talk to high school kids, to tell them this is what it's like to study in a STEM field, right? Um, or as you go into your first job, you can see, is there like a group in the organization that is supporting women, right? And if there is, join it and see, can I be an active part of it? Can I join it in some capacity that where I'm helping? And if there isn't one, you can say, oh, can I form one group like that, right? Is the organization giving money and sponsoring these types of activities, events, conferences? Can I go talk to someone about doing that? Does the organization have training around diversity and inclusion? If it does, let's have it. If not, can we ask, you know, the HR department to get one started? And so I think, or, you know, are we hiring people? If we're hiring people, are we hiring them according to best practices, to be kind of gender and ethnic, like diversity and inclusion, best guidelines? Like, how do our job postings look like? How do the hiring process look like? Are we making sure that we bring enough diversity into the pipeline? Do we have programs to make sure that, you know, minorities and diversity groups have support systems and are being retained, not just hired? So there is, at every step of the way, I think there are, and no matter who you are, there are things you can choose to proactively do. And the more influence you have, I feel the more responsible you should be about making use of that to encourage change.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And another question that I just wanted to ask you is that in your field, just because there's not a lot of women that are involved, who are some role models that you have, either inside of your field or outside? Other than your father, I already know that.
Well, I mean, definitely my boss, because she's just so like kick-ass, and I'm very proud of the fact that, you know, this office in Toronto, even though it's like it's in tech, it's in AI, it's in deep learning, like it's a female leadership team. So she, myself, and our technical project manager are all women, and we have, relatively speaking, much higher percentage of women in the organization than you would typically have, and a lot of diversity in general. And I think that's because we are very mindful of it, and this is something that we care about and we invest in. Some other role models, I mean, throughout my, I think often the role models that I have are people who are in my community, that like, so basically people that effectively are my friends, right? So you're forming your community. Like, this is an important time in your life in terms of the people that you meet might end up being like your, you know, like really close friends and colleagues for life. And you don't necessarily see it right now, but because you don't know where your futures will take you. But, you know, the group of people that I did my PhD with, so, you know, we were just a bunch of, you know, PhD students, right? Dorky PhD students doing our stuff and trying to graduate. And now, you know, some whatever 10 or 15 years later, a lot of them are world leaders in like in Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, right? And these are just like my friend that I used to get drunk with. So, and you know, no one's different, and like goof around with. And so, so a lot of them are just people that I respect and admire and appreciate. And I know it's not like someone who is like up on a pedestal and I don't know if they're a good person. I don't know their values, but these are people that I'm like, okay, I know who you are and how you work, and I can have a conversation with you and ask you questions and learn from you. So I have a lot of kind of role models that are basically my friends.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I'm just gonna pass it on to Hannah to moderate some more of the discussion. Go on.
Okay, thank you very much. So the question that I'll ask you to get started, Inmar, is how could internalized racism and sexism affect your work and mental health? And do you have any solutions or suggestions to deal with these issues?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's a hard question. Um, there's definitely, like, throughout my career, I've come across it in different ways, and like anything from, you know, people touching me inappropriately, saying inappropriate things to me, or in a way the much more difficult to deal with, like you know, the things that are not as blatant are in a way more difficult to deal with, like the, you know, like hiding there under the surface. I think my my approach has been to I guess to be professional. I think when people feel that you project confidence and you project professionalism and you know your stuff, I think they are less inclined to, you know, to wanna deal with you, right? And so maybe that's been part of my strategy. It might not even been conscious, but I'm just like, okay, I'm not like, I'm gonna stand up and stand, like, you know, make sure that I have the power pose and not apologize, not you know, not apologize for who I am. You know, there's a lot of talk about like how women communicate versus men. And so I would do these things like where, like, so I learned about it, and then I would look at an email and I'll start removing all the maybe, sort of, perhaps, you know, all of these words that are basically kind of diminishing the message. No, I know what I want to tell you. I want to tell you, you know, this. So I'm just going to make sure that I go through the exercise of telling you this instead of like shrouding it in all of these apologetic ways of doing things. And so so that was another part of it. And I think more more recently, it's also about sometimes having a conversation. Like sometimes you, and it's a weird conversation to have. Like someone can do something and you just want to call them out, and you want to call them out, but they're also someone that you actually like, and you like, it's not, it's easy to call some, well, I don't know if it's easy, but if it's someone who is like just a despicable character, sure, maybe you can call them out and shout at them. But if it's someone who is actually a friend, or like someone that you admire, or someone that you it's more complicated. And so just figuring out how to say, okay, like, I want to say something because I actually care about you as a person, and you did something that is hurtful to me, and I think you probably want to know about it, right? And and I have to tell you that because like this has crossed a boundary. Like this is not something that I can accept, right? So just trying to, and of course it's upsetting that it's on me or on us to have these conversations, but I'm also pretty pragmatic. I mean, that's kind of the way, you know, like for me, I'm like, okay, I can be upset that, you know, I am the one who needs to do the, you know, the emotional labor, or I can go ahead and do it and hope for some improvement. Yeah.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for that answer. I think it's really important for everybody to think of how they can really turn the tables and be the powerful voice in those types of conversations. So thank you for sharing that advice with us. just leaping off of that question, how do you envision the future for women in the workplace?
So I think like my hope is that we have a lot more leaders because I mean, I think women, and these are broad generalizations, but they tend to be a bit more shy and a bit less confident. And, you know, we tend to call it like, we don't want to brag, right? Like and, you know, there are like, we can get into a long conversation about why that's the case, but that is the case for many. But once the women that I've seen who make a decision to be like, okay, I'm just going to step into this leadership role and I'm going to do it in a way that I feel works for me. They are incredible leaders. They're often like they're thoughtful, they're compassionate, they deliver and execute. They have a lot of integrity. Nothing is too big or too small. Like they actually on average are you know much better leaders than men for the same level. And so I'm just like I'm waiting for the world where we just have a lot more women who are like saying to themselves, okay, I don't feel super confident and I feel shy and I have an imposter syndrome, and yet I'm gonna go and give it a shot and I'm gonna give it like I'm gonna be the best self that I can be, and I think we can get a lot out of it. There are all of these statistics showing that you know the more women you have on your board of directors, the more women you have in your senior leaderships and so on, like the better the company does. So we have the data to show that this is a useful thing, but I don't even know the data. Like I can see it and you know I can intuitively feel it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Just to jump off of that now, just in the same, like to echo the same values here, what advice would you give young women in high school or young women in university that aspire to be leaders like you?
So I think the advice I would give you is be a leader like you, not like me. I mean, figure out what is your true way of doing things. There are so many different ways and styles and approaches for leadership, and to me, a lot of it is about becoming yourself or allowing yourself to be who you are, understanding yourself, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. You know, if there are things that you're doing where you feel like you know this is not the right way or this doesn't feel like true to me, then knowing that things like there is so much flexibility, you can do things in so many different ways and we don't have to prescribe to like this one way of doing things. And if you think about and we don't need to be afraid about doing things differently, and as long as we kind of follow our I really believe that we have like this really wise voice inside us that kind of knows, and then we have other voices that come out of fear or insecurity, and they can be unkind and they can be hateful, and we know the difference. Like if we like listen inside and we have this internal monologue, we know which ones are you know the ones we shouldn't really be listening to and which ones are the ones that we should be listening to. And I think they are you know the wise one is pretty wise. And so my recommendation is to figure out how to get comfortable with listening to this and align ourselves to doing what we think make us feel well and alive and connected and capable. And sure, you can read leadership books, you can do and there's like a lot of stuff to learn from all of these things. So there are books, there are events, there are workshops and so on. And I definitely recommend trying out many things to see many approaches. But at the end of the day, the more I allow myself to be myself, the more I seem to be successful at my job. So be you.
That's really good advice. That's very touching, like very near and dear to the heart, and something that everybody can definitely work on is just, you know, being true to themselves and using those skills to enhance their position in the professional world, for sure. And now I just want to jump back into your field of work. So in your field of work, what are the top guiding principles that have allowed you to achieve success, and how did you develop these traits?
Yeah, it's I think it's a bit of a hard question because it's unclear. Like you don't really know of all the things that you're doing and trying out what are really the things that lead you to your success. I think for me, a few things that I believe in at least is integrity and honesty, kind of like being truthful with myself and with others and not trying to not shy away from these uncomfortable situations or conversations, and just trying to, and bringing in compassion. So that's another thing that I feel is important, like just understanding that, you know, like assuming best intentions and assuming that everyone just sees the same situation from their perspective and their narrative and who they are, and figuring out how do we still allow people to you know, to blossom even when there are conflicts or disagreements. Another thing is like the nothing is too big or too small. Like, you know, you know, I was a VP, but I still like wiped, you know, you know, the table after we had like a meal together for the team, right? Like I don't think of things being beneath me, but I also like, if there is something that is like huge and I want to go after it, I will also go after it. So just like having the courage and humility to try and do everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Inmar. I have one more question for you. So if you were conducting an interview for an engineering position, what do you look for in the ideal candidate?
So like the basic, of course you need to have the skill, like the skill set for the job. And you know, it's not necessarily knowing a particular technology, it's, you know, we evaluate that the candidate has the right basic background, you know, for whatever area it is, and then that they seem to be able to logically think through a problem and, you know, be analytical about it. But that's kind of the baseline. I also like, I need, for my team, I need to see people who are able to communicate effectively and can, you know, feel comfortable asking questions, reaching out to people they don't necessarily know, especially nowadays where so much is over Zoom. So being proactively communicative is important. Having your own sense of motivation, in the sense that my style of management has never been to, you know, be on people's case and ask them for daily updates and, you know, tell them exactly what they need to do and check in on them. I don't like, to me that seems very oppressive. So I want to give people, here is your goal, go and get it, right? But for that I need you to be self-motivated, and I need you to be to feel accountable internally, not because someone is telling you what to do. So I also look for that. And finally, like the no asshole rule. Like I don't want people who are you know, who have too much of a sense of ego and of themselves, because it just doesn't work well for other people. And so to me, it doesn't matter how you know, how talented you are technically, if I get that vibe, it's like, it's just not gonna work.
Most definitely, most definitely. So thank you so much, Inmar, for having the panel discussion with us. So that is the end of the panel discussion. We'll now move on to the question and answer period, where everybody in the audience will get a chance to ask a question. So just as a reminder to everybody, you can use the raise hand function if you're comfortable speaking your questions into your mic. You don't have to necessarily turn your camera on to ask your question. Or if you're not comfortable, please feel free to send it in the chat and Parnyan and I will read them out loud. So we will now begin. Okay, Sarah.
When you're doing like your 5 years, 6 years of PhD, like what made you keep going?
Right, it's a great question, thanks. Definitely, I wanted to quit many times. It's hard, and I think a lot of what comes up for successful people is not necessarily talent, but a lot of grit. And like the one thing, I can't control how smart I am. Maybe I'm smart, maybe I'm not, but I can control, I feel like I can control where my ass is. I can put it in a chair and just like keep it there. So so I definitely just had this sense that, okay, it's hard and it's I'm not having fun and I'm not happy, but I'm halfway through this thing and I really want to just persevere. But honestly, at some point it got to be too much, and I went and I was like, I started to feel my mental health kind of not in a good place, and I reached out and I got some, I went to see, like, I used the university services, the therapy services, I don't remember, the counseling services, yeah. And so that was actually super helpful. I mean, I thought I will talk about, how difficult it is to do a PhD, and I ended up talking about my whatever family issues, but I guess maybe it was something that I needed to get out of my system, and somehow it helped. Um, another thing was, that was helpful, like at some point I didn't see how will I actually graduate, like what is my thesis going to be about, like it felt like I'm infinitely far from it. And I had a conversation with a friend who basically said, okay, let's sit down and put together a plan. Like, what are actually the steps that you need in order to graduate? And then you can, have these as milestones that you're actually trying to put dates towards, and come up with like a plan on how you're going to achieve them. So it doesn't look so nebulous. I mean, that's a very standard engineering thing. You take a big problem and you break it into small chunks, and the small chunks suddenly seem a lot more reasonable to accomplish, and you don't look at this big scary thing at the end. You're just like, okay, this is the next thing I'm gonna do, and I'm only gonna think about that, and once I put a check mark next to it, I'm gonna think about the next thing. So also kind of taking it a day at a time. And another thing I used to do, that was definitely so during my PhD, I would have like, okay, so now I have this list of things that I need to do, and it's so much work, and I would schedule fun. Basically, it's like giving myself little gifts of accomplishment, and it can be anything from a muffin, right? Okay, so I'm gonna do that for 2 more hours, and then I'm gonna go get a muffin, and that'll make me happy. To, okay, I'm gonna have to do like all of these things, and at the end, I'm gonna take a day off and go to Canada's Wonderland, right? So I'll have all of these things that I love doing, and I would just like schedule myself these little treats or big treats for accomplishing things.
So Sabrina is asking, during the pandemic, what has changed in the hiring process, and are there even more gender gaps now than before? She thanks you for your time as well.
Sure. I don't think I've noticed gender gaps, but the hiring we've done is, I don't think it's statistically significant. We haven't hired enough people to be able to answer that question. But I think I can see where it's coming from, because a lot of parents with kids are really struggling, and so how they make the decision, it can often be that the woman, for whatever reason, is the one who has to give up her career. But yeah, I just haven't noted it from the point of view of hiring, although I'm sure that it's happening. How is it different? So the way we used to do hiring is, we used to do a couple of phone screens, and then we would bring the candidate into the office, and they would meet with everyone, and they would we would get to know them. We would have lunch with them. It was a lot more, I mean, between the formal parts, there were like some informal parts, and also they would be able to see, this is what the office looks like. This is what, actually being with people here is going to look like. And unfortunately, we can't right now. And so I think it's very hard. It's very hard for the candidate, I think, to get a sense of, am I going to be happy here? Are these people I'm going to enjoy working with? Because even like the working with people has diminished to like only the work almost. Like in the past, you would always find some time to chat and have like a social, even if it's 5 minutes or over lunch or after work. Whereas now you get on a call, you get on a Zoom meeting, and you're going to spend the time typically talking about that. So people need to be a lot more cognizant about introducing the social things somehow, whether it's, so on my team, when the pandemic started, everyone was very, obviously people were upset for a variety of reasons. And so I was like, okay, we need to make sure that we're seeing each other every day, just so that we see people. So every day we would do like a 30-minute social thing, where we would also like, I would typically bring some sort of an icebreaker question, and then we will go around kind of answering the question. And that was just so that everyone has at least 30 minutes a day where they're doing something social and seeing their peers, and not just concentrating on the work. And then, you know, as the month wore off, we kind of, you know, started, like I asked other people to take on the role of facilitating these conversations and bringing their own thing that they wanted to do. Like maybe they don't want to do an icebreaker, maybe they want to do like an online game. So we did online games that different people suggested, and we kind of reduced the frequency as everyone seemed to get the hang of things and be a bit less anxious about it all. So we still do it, but not as frequently.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you so much, Inmar. So our next question here says, in the next couple of years, what are the goals you are trying to achieve at Uber or outside of work?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So I love my job, and in terms of like my career, I have like this list of things that I wanna have out of a job, and I think everyone has that, even if they don't think about it in like this organized way, which is, you know, I want to work on awesome technology, I want to work with great people, I want to be well compensated, I want to work close to home. Like there's like all the things that kind of matter, and everyone might have their own list, but and this job has really ticked every box on my list, and for the life of me I couldn't imagine what someone might offer to me that would make me leave or switch. And, you know, at some point in your career, you do start getting a lot of recruiters kind of, you know, pinging you on LinkedIn, on whatever. And like, none of the things ever seemed remotely as exciting as just continuing to do what I'm doing right now. But then about a year ago, something weird happened to me, which was completely unexpected. I started writing fiction. And it took me by surprise, to be honest. I mean, I always loved reading, but it wasn't like I never really wrote. And I started writing and writing more, and it became quite compulsive. I don't really have a different word for it. And at some point, I realized I actually want to write more than I want to work in tech. And so at the end of the year, I'm quitting my job, and I'm gonna, yeah, I know. And I'm just going to devote myself 100% to writing fiction. Yeah. So not even nonfiction, just stories.
That sounds amazing.
Think I've ever met someone that has went through every single thing that is in the academia. That's so.
Do you want to expand a little bit on what you're writing about, if that can be public knowledge at the moment?
No, I mean, it's really weird. Like I'm sure that quite a few of you are artistic and have artistic tendencies, and I was never artistic. So I'm like discovering it at a very old age. Like, what is it like to create, and what does it mean to invent things that are not technical ideas? So a lot of the stories just come to me. So they just arrive, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta write this. So it's in different types of genres, and I'm just letting it happen. There is a book that I have been working on. It's like a detective story, which is not a genre that I actually read that much or at all, which is even more weird. Like, why this story? But I'm like, okay, it's a cool story, I want to write it. And so my plan is to really work on that book. Right now I have enough time to just work on these short stories, and I'm actually going to put them on my website shortly, like, because I'm happy for people to read them. So and it's like science fiction and some fantasy and some horror. It's like it's a mix of genres. So so on my website, probably in like a few weeks, there'll be like one of the pages will just be links to a bunch of my stories. And if anyone is interested, you're welcome to check it out.
I'm for sure gonna check it out because I'm very interested by your life in general. I just want to know how you will write and what you will write. So Hannah.
Yes, so I'm just going to say this is a last call for anybody that might have any questions. If anybody else has a question, now is your time to send it in the chat, or if you'd like to say it on the mic, please go ahead. We'll give you another like 10 seconds-ish to go ahead and do so.
Yeah, because
And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just mention like that, you know, you were on this, just so that I know the context.
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'm definitely gonna add you on LinkedIn. Thanks for giving us the approval so I don't feel like a weirdo. My question was, I think that sometimes we're loath to admit that this happens as feminists, but sometimes in the workplace, for whatever reason, it's another woman that's your biggest obstacle to working well instead of being your ally. And whether that's due to internalized sexism or you just don't get on or something like that. Have you ever been in this situation, and how did you get past that?
I think much earlier in my career. So when I was doing my PhD, there were a couple of times where I felt I was kind of um, stabbed in the back, let's call it, by a woman who, maybe there was one case where it was someone who I was working together on a publication, and she ended up not including me in the publication, which is kind of like, you're not supposed to be doing these things. And another person who was more senior than me and promised me that I'll be the first author, which is a really important deal when you're publishing, like the order of the authors. And then she ended up switching it. And it felt like a betrayal, and it felt like very frustrating in the sense of like, why does it have to be a woman? I don't want it to be a woman. But I also think that a big part of it was like who I was and where I was in my kind of journey of understanding myself and being able to deal with conflict. And I think, what I learned since then is in our head, we can create these like very creative stories and narratives about why other people do things and who they are and whether they're like conniving or manipulative or whatnot. And over the years, I've came to shift my way of thinking about it. And what I think is, I think no one is a villain in their own story. I think that's a principle that I really believe in, and that a lot of what we perceive as, oh, this person is manipulative or this person is, aggressive or whatever. It's who we are meet who they are. It's not a truth statement, right? And from their perspective, they have their own story where how they're acting can totally make sense. And when you, especially as a manager, you hear people come to you, like two people will come to you and they'll tell you what happened that got them pissed off at one another. And you're hearing two completely different stories, right? But they were both there. And so you learn to appreciate how so much of how we think about people and what they do and how they do is based on how we filter it and how we think about it and who we are. And so now I don't feel, I feel like if I felt someone was, undermining me, or, man or a woman, like I had someone on my team who I felt, wow, okay, this feels really uncomfortable. I feel like, and this was not a woman, like they're undermining me. And they're like, basically they're doing things that give me a bad reputation. Why are they doing it? Are they after my job? Like I got into all sorts of, crazy places. And then I went and had an honest conversation with them, a vulnerable conversation where I said, okay, I'm gonna do, like, I had to decide whether I'm gonna trust you or not with telling you all of this. And I decided that I wanna trust you because this is how I wanna operate. And so this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm seeing. And like, please tell me why you're doing all of that stuff, right? Because this is what it looks like to me. And then this was probably the most difficult and the most honest conversation we had. And, it turns out that that person had their own completely different way of doing things and seeing things. And in their context, it made a lot of sense. It wasn't like, a mastermind plan to undermine me. He didn't realize necessarily some of the outcomes of some of the things he said. And we kind of worked through it. So my perspective now, if something like that would happen to me, is to, move back from all of these assumptions and assertions and come with compassion, with curiosity, and try to understand, like, where is the other person coming from, and can we find a place where we're both feeling okay about the situation. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. And I did see one more hand go up from Carol, and I wanted to know if you wanted to ask your question. Yes, please, Carol, go ahead. I see that your hand is up.
Sorry, yeah. First of all, thank you so much for being here and like taking the time to talk to all of us. You have quite an impressive career, and honestly, like it's been quite eye-revealing. I was gonna ask you, so you know how girls and like women in general sometimes they doubt themselves. So when was the time that you doubted yourself and you were really hesitating on doing something or starting something, and then you went for it anyways, and you kind of like what was the process for you to go for it per se?
So there are many, many times like that. So I'm just trying to think which one am I going to pick to answer that. But I think even like at Uber when I started, I was, I just was ramping up, and there was a lot of stuff I didn't do. I didn't know. There was a lot of stuff that, sure, I knew like a lot about machine learning, but the areas and the problems they were solving, like this was all new stuff to me. And I wasn't sure that I'm like, it's the same thing always. Am I good enough for this job, right? Like, can I actually do it? And then I told myself what I tell myself often when I get into this place of self-doubt and insecurities and imposter syndrome, which is, well, I tell myself two things. One is any amount of energy that I invest in wondering if I'm good or not, if I'm good enough or not, is energy I'm not investing in trying to solve the problem and trying to do my job. And so the more I can just focus on, take all of my energy and put it in solving the problem and trying to do my best. And if my best is not good enough, someone else is going to tell me. That shouldn't be my problem to deal with, right? Like if they're going to fire me because I'm not good enough, they'll fire me. Me thinking about it is not going to help in any way. And I can use that same energy to just try and like put my head down, work on the problem, take a deep breath or 5 or 10 and just invest myself in the problem. The second thing that I tell myself is, like whenever I feel the imposter syndrome coming, I remind myself that almost everyone who is in a high performance type of environment feels the imposter syndrome, and it's actually very rare to not have that. Some people don't, but most people have it. It's just that men almost never talk about it. Women are a little bit more, talkative about it, which is good. But so I'm like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm an imposter now, right now. The important word here is feeling. I'm feeling like an imposter. I don't know that I'm an imposter, and I would need to be pretty damn special to be the one person who feels like an imposter who is actually an imposter, right? Because probabilistically, if you follow me, there aren't a lot of people who are both, feeling like imposters and are imposters. Most of us just are normal people, high achieving, who can do the job and feel like we can't do the job. So I just tell myself, you're not that special. You're not the one who is at the bell curve all the way at the end who feels like that and is that. You're just feeling like that. So just go back and try to do your job.
Thank you so much. Carol, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you. So yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, that was really insightful, especially having that self-regulation, and putting your foot down to yourself sometimes is really important as well.
Yeah.
If there's no more questions, I would just like to say that we really, really appreciate you for giving us your time and meeting up with us, Inmar. And as a student club, we think it's super important for students to hear from leaders that work in various industries. And especially during the pandemic, the situation it's brought for us, it's been really hard for us to network and make these new connections. So we truly do appreciate your time and all the knowledge that you've shared with us today. And as a small token of our appreciation, we will be sending you a gift on behalf of the Women Inclusive team.
Oh, thanks. That's very sweet. And thanks for inviting me. And hopefully that was useful for you. And thanks for doing a wonderful job moderating, Hannah and Parnian.
Thank you.
Awesome.
This is just a reminder that we will be posting a video of the event, and we can send it to you as well in our email. And this is just so students who weren't able to watch because they have other commitments will be able to also take advantage of this. And once again, thank you so much, Inmar. We had a really great time talking with you.
Thank you. I had fun too. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
And good luck.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you.